Video Michaela, she looks pretty. She and Leah.
I'm sure that many of us are familiar with the animal abuse commercials that frequent our television screens. We've become accustomed to hearing Sarah McLachlan in the background as images of dogs and cats pass by with mournful looks on their faces. We see in their pitiful faces the hurt that they've been through and the longing for security in their eyes. Now I want you to replace those images of the dogs and cats with images of faces of young women and children in the same condition. Imagine their faces pushed up against the bars, begging for their freedom and crying out for your help. This is what human trafficking looks like. According to the facts section of the A21 campaign's website, an anti-human trafficking organization, human trafficking is the illegal trade of human beings for the purposes of forced labor and sex trafficking. This website also states that an estimated 27 million are in bondage every year. This epidemic, much like cancer, started out small and insignificant, but now it is plaguing our world and even our own country. As Christians, human trafficking should be a crime that we are aware of, and we should be doing everything that we can to combat against it. Today, I'm going to give you 3 specific reasons why we as Christians should be concerned about and involved in ending this modern-day slavery. First, human trafficking is a crime. Secondly, human trafficking causes emotional and mental abuse. And lastly, human trafficking happens right in our own backyard. Let us first take a look at the most lawful reason why we should be concerned about human trafficking. It is a crime. Human trafficking has become the fastest growing criminal industry in history. A January 2012 article in the USA Today entitled "Human Trafficking, a Crime Growing in the U.S." states that according to the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice states that human trafficking has become the second fastest growing criminal industry just behind drug trafficking. This horrific crime has been labeled as the gold standard of the crime industry, according to an article entitled "Bring All Girls Back" by Belinda Luscombe in a Time magazine just released 3 months ago. This article speaks of the 276 Nigerian girls that were kidnapped and inducted into the sex slave industry earlier this year. This event has caused worldwide recognition of human trafficking, and it has made us realize that this $32 billion crime industry must come to an end. As well as human trafficking being a crime, human trafficking victims are not only subjected to physical abuse, but also emotional and mental abuse. Ms. Luscombe also states in her Time magazine that this sex slave movement, the bonds of the sex slave movement, are economic and physiological rather than physical. These poor women and children are extracted from their homes and families and thrown into lives of exploitation, starvation, and enslavement of the body and mind. People just like Nade. Nade was willing to tell her story to the US Today article to show other victims like herself that there is hope and freedom for those who have been enslaved. Nade is a 31-year-old African woman who was taken captive as a housekeeper for a Middle Eastern family in Detroit, Michigan. Nade was exposed to no pay, no medical attention, and no care by this Middle Eastern family. Instead, she was threatened by this family that they would kill her mother, and they verbally abused her. Day in and day out, she was told by the woman of the house that she was an idiot and that she did not have a mind of her own. This poor young woman who was just trying to find financial help for her family was dragged into a 22-month-long enslavement that has left her scarred both emotionally and mentally. Human trafficking does not just involve physical abuse, it also involves mental and emotional abuse. As we have seen in Nade's story, human trafficking doesn't just happen in countries overseas. It happens right here in America. Human trafficking's tentacles have imprisoned Europe and Asia, and it has also made its way to America. Our very own West Palm Beach is a thriving port for human trafficking in Florida. Shani McManus, in her January 2014 article entitled Exposing Human Trafficking in the Sun Sentinel, states that many sex trafficking victims are young runaways, and according to statistics, Florida has 30 to 40,000 runaways. Nancy Ratson, the chief of Stop Sex Trafficking Miami Awareness Campaign, is also cited in this article by saying that 1 in 7 children are runaways, and within 48 hours of them being on the streets, they are picked up by sex traffickers. Human trafficking is happening in our very own backyard. California, New York, and Florida are the 3 most concentrated states of human trafficking in America. And yet, I'm positive that less than half of the inhabitants of these states even know what is happening underneath their very noses. Today, I've told you how human trafficking is a crime, how it emotionally and mentally abuses its victims, and how it happens right here in our very own backyards. Human trafficking is not an issue that should be taken lightly. These women and children are physically, emotionally, and mentally abused. As the second fastest growing crime epidemic in America, we need to realize that this is not just a case of widespread kidnapping. This is the illegal removal of young women and children from their homes for the purposes of forced labor and sex exploitation. Runaways in our very own backyard are being taken from their families and shipped off to unknown places, possibly never to see their family again. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to just passively sit by as our fellow Americans are picked off one by one by the sex slave industry? Or will you stand up for those whose freedom has been stolen from them? Every 30 seconds, another human being is captured and enslaved. Will you fight for their freedom? For more information on what you can do to stop this heinous crime, go to www.a21campaign.org.